What if I told you that everything you've been taught about money is backwards? That the people who claim money doesn't matter are often the ones whose lives have been most damaged by not having it? While you're scrolling through social media, seeing people post about their minimalist lifestyles and how they found happiness without material possessions, they're probably doing it from their expensive laptop in their parents' house. My name is Nick, and I've spent years studying how money actually affects our daily lives, relationships, and mental health. If you're tired of being told that wanting financial security makes you shallow, stick around because we're about to uncover some truths that might completely change how you think about money. Here's something that will probably surprise you. When researchers studied over 450,000 adults, they discovered that happiness doesn't just magically appear when you meditate enough or practice gratitude. It actually plateaus at a specific income level of around $90,000 per year. Before you roll your eyes and think that sounds like a lot, let me put this in perspective. That's roughly what a decent portfolio can generate in passive income without you ever having to work again. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's start with something more fundamental that nobody wants to talk about. Right now, as you're watching this video, there's a 72% chance you're stressed about money. That's not my opinion or some motivational speaker nonsense. That's data from the American Psychological Association. Nearly 3 out of 4 adults report feeling stressed about their finances, whether it's making monthly payments or being overwhelmed by debt. Think about that for a second. We're talking about the majority of people walking around carrying this invisible weight that affects their sleep, their relationships, and their health. Yet somehow we've created this cultural narrative that caring about money makes you greedy or superficial. Here's what's really happening when you don't have enough money. Every single decision in your life gets filtered through the question of cost. Can I afford this grocery item? Should I take this job opportunity even though it requires me to move? Can I help my friend who's struggling financially? Should I have kids if I can barely support myself? When money is tight, you're not just broke. You're trapped in a decision-making prison where your choices are limited by your bank account balance. Meanwhile, the people telling you that money doesn't buy happiness have enough of it that they never have to think about these questions. Let me give you a reality check that nobody talks about. If you're working 40 hours per week, you're spending more than 1/3 of your waking hours away from everything and everyone you actually care about. You're trading your most valuable resource, time, for money because you have no other choice. And here's the kicker. Most people doing this trade aren't even enjoying the work. Quick test. If your job stopped paying you tomorrow, would you still show up? If the answer is no, then you're essentially renting out your life to pay for the privilege of existing. But it gets worse. When you factor in the time spent preparing for work, commuting, and recovering from work, that 40-hour week easily becomes 50 or 60 hours of your life consumed by something you'd rather not be doing. That's not living. That's surviving with extra steps. Now let's talk about something that makes people really uncomfortable. Money problems are the leading cause of divorce, not infidelity, not growing apart, not incompatible personalities, money. The thing we're supposed to pretend doesn't matter is literally destroying relationships left and right. When couples fight about money, they're not really fighting about dollars and cents. They're fighting about stress, fear, different values, and the feeling of being trapped. One person wants to save for security while the other feels deprived. One person sees an opportunity while the other sees a risk they can't afford to take. These aren't character flaws or communication problems. These are the natural consequences of not having enough financial breathing room to make decisions based on what you actually want rather than what you can afford. Here's where it gets really interesting, and this is something that wealthy people understand but rarely talk about. Having money isn't primarily about buying expensive things, it's about buying choices. Rich people often say that the ability to purchase something is more satisfying than actually buying it. They're not talking about some philosophical enlightenment, they're talking about the psychological freedom that comes with knowing you have options. When you have money, you can quit a job that's making you miserable. You can help a friend in crisis. You can take calculated risks because failure won't destroy you. You can say no to opportunities that don't align with your values because you're not desperate. But when you're living paycheck to paycheck, every opportunity becomes a necessity. You take the job that pays more, even if it makes you miserable. You can't help friends who are struggling because you're struggling too. You make decisions based on fear rather than possibility. Let me paint you a picture of what this looks like in real life. Imagine you have a friend who needs help getting back on their feet. Maybe they lost their job. Maybe they had a medical emergency. Maybe they made some bad financial decisions. If you're financially secure, you can offer genuine help without putting your own stability at risk. But if you're barely making ends meet, you're in the horrible position of wanting to help someone you care about while knowing that doing so could jeopardize your own situation. That's not a character test. That's a resource constraint that creates emotional pain for everyone involved. The same principle applies to family relationships. If you have kids, money determines how much time you can spend with them versus how much time you have to spend earning money to support them. It affects the quality of education they receive, the experiences you can share together, and the opportunities you can provide for their future. This isn't about spoiling children or buying them everything they want. It's about having the financial flexibility to be present for the important moments instead of missing them because you had to work. And let's be brutally honest about something else. Your health is directly connected to your financial situation. When you're stressed about money, your body produces cortisol and other stress hormones that wreak havoc on your immune system, your sleep, your digestion, and your mental clarity. People with financial stress are more likely to develop anxiety, depression, and a whole host of physical ailments. They're also less likely to seek medical care when they need it because they're worried about the cost. So the very thing that's making them sick is also preventing them from getting better. But here's what really gets me. The people who are most vocal about money not being important are usually in one of two categories. Either they've never experienced real financial hardship, or they're so defeated by their financial situation that they've convinced themselves not to care as a defense mechanism. The trust fund kid telling you that money doesn't buy happiness has never had to choose between groceries and rent. The person who says they don't care about money while working 2 jobs to make ends meet is protecting their sanity by pretending their situation is a choice rather than a constraint. Meanwhile, the people who have actually built wealth understand that money is a tool. It's not the end goal, but it's the means to achieve almost every other goal you might have. Want to travel the world? Money. Want to start a charitable foundation? Money. Want to spend more time with your family? Money buys you that time by eliminating the need to trade it for survival. Now, here's something that'll make you question everything you thought you knew about success. We've been conditioned to believe that wanting financial freedom somehow makes us materialistic or shallow, but the reality is far more complex and honestly pretty messed up when you think about it. The average person spends their entire life in what I call the financial hamster wheel. They wake up, go to work, come home exhausted, pay their bills, and repeat this cycle for 40 years, hoping that somehow, magically, they'll have enough saved for retirement. Spoiler alert, most of them won't. But here's the part that nobody wants to admit. The system is designed to keep you running on that wheel. Your employer benefits from your financial dependence because it means you can't easily leave. Credit card companies profit from your financial stress because desperate people make poor decisions. Even the government benefits because financially stressed people don't have the time or energy to question how their tax dollars are being spent. You know what's really twisted? The people who benefit most from your financial dependence are often the same ones preaching about how money doesn't matter. Easy to say when you're the one collecting the profits. Let's talk about something that might sting a little. Your current financial situation is probably preventing you from being the person you actually want to be. Not because you need designer clothes or a fancy car to define yourself, but because financial stress literally changes your brain chemistry. When you're constantly worried about money, your brain operates in survival mode. You become more reactive, less creative, and more likely to make short-term decisions that hurt your long-term interests. You might snap at people you care about, not because you're a bad person, but because chronic financial stress has hijacked your nervous system. This is why broke people often seem to make terrible financial decisions. It's not because they're stupid or lazy, it's because their brains are running on stress hormones that prioritize immediate survival over rational planning. Meanwhile, people with financial security can think clearly and make better long-term choices, which creates even more wealth. It's a vicious cycle that keeps the poor poor and makes the rich richer. But here's where it gets really interesting. Having money doesn't just change your bank account. It changes your entire relationship with risk and opportunity. When you're financially secure, failure becomes feedback instead of catastrophe. You can try new things, start businesses, invest in yourself, and take calculated risks because you have a safety net. But when you're living paycheck to paycheck, every decision feels like it could ruin your life. This is why most breakthrough innovations come from people who had some financial cushion. Not necessarily because they were born rich, but because they had enough resources to survive while they figured things out. The greatest risk most people can't afford to take is the risk of success. Think about the last time someone offered you an opportunity that sounded amazing but required some upfront investment or temporary income reduction. Maybe it was starting a business, going back to school, or taking a lower paying job with better long-term prospects. If you're like most people, you probably had to say no, not because the opportunity was bad, but because you couldn't afford to take the chance. That's not financial responsibility, that's financial imprisonment. And let's address the elephant in the room. The whole money doesn't buy happiness argument is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of what happiness actually is. Happiness isn't some permanent state of bliss that you achieve and then maintain forever. It's the absence of unnecessary suffering combined with the presence of meaningful experiences. Money might not directly buy happiness, but it absolutely eliminates many sources of unhappiness. It removes the stress of choosing between rent and groceries. It eliminates the anxiety of not being able to afford healthcare. It can remove the situational stress that comes from feeling trapped in a life you didn't choose. Once those basic stressors are eliminated, you're free to focus on the things that do create genuine fulfillment. Relationships, personal growth, contributing to causes you care about, pursuing your passions, but it's pretty hard to self-actualize when you're worried about keeping the lights on. Here's something that might blow your mind. The amount of money required to eliminate most financial stress is actually much lower than most people think. Remember that $90,000 figure I mentioned earlier? That's not just some arbitrary number. It represents the point where money stops being a daily concern and starts being a tool for creating experiences and opportunities. And here's the really crazy part. You don't even need to earn $90,000 at a job to achieve that level of financial security. If you can build a portfolio that generates that much in passive income, you might never have to work again. Ever. Let me break down what this actually looks like. If you can save and invest $22,500 per year, which is roughly what many people spend on car payments, dining out, and entertainment, you could potentially build a $2.25 million portfolio in about 25 years. Using a conservative 4% withdrawal rate, that portfolio would generate $90,000 annually without you having to work. 25 years might sound like forever when you're starting out, but think about where you were 25 years ago. Time passes whether you're building wealth or not. The question is whether you want to look back in 2.5 decades wondering what could have been, or celebrating the fact that you never have to set an alarm clock again. But here's what most people miss entirely. Building wealth isn't just about the end goal. It's about what happens to your mindset and your life along the way. Every dollar you save and invest is a small declaration of independence. Every month your investment account grows is proof that you're capable of creating a different future. The process of building wealth forces you to develop skills that make you better at everything else. You learn to delay gratification, think long-term, and make decisions based on logic rather than emotion. You become more disciplined, more strategic, and more confident in your ability to solve problems. These aren't just financial skills, these are life skills that improve your relationships, your career, your health, and your sense of purpose. The person who successfully builds wealth is fundamentally different from the person who started the journey, and that transformation is often more valuable than the money itself. Now, I'm not saying that everyone needs to become obsessed with accumulating massive amounts of wealth. That's just as destructive as pretending money doesn't matter. What I am saying is that having enough money to eliminate financial stress and create choices should be a priority for anyone who wants to live life on their own terms. The sweet spot isn't being so rich that money becomes meaningless, it's having enough that money stops being a constraint on your decisions and starts being a tool for creating the life you actually want. Here's something that'll really mess with your head. The people who are most financially successful often spend less money than people who are broke. I know that sounds backwards, but stick with me here. Wealthy people understand something that most of us were never taught. They know the difference between looking rich and being rich, and spoiler alert, they're not the same thing. The guy driving the brand new BMW with custom rims might be making payments that eat up half his income. Meanwhile, the millionaire next door is driving a 10-year-old Honda because she'd rather invest that car payment money and let compound interest do the heavy lifting. This is where most people completely lose the plot. They think wealth building means depriving yourself of everything fun until you're old and gray. But that's not what smart money management looks like at all. It's about being intentional with your spending instead of letting your money disappear into a black hole of impulse purchases and lifestyle inflation. Every time you get a raise, your expenses mysteriously increase to match your new income. It's like your money has its own gravitational pull toward your bank account's event horizon. But here's where things get really interesting, and this is something that separates people who build lasting wealth from people who stay stuck forever. It's not just about how much money you make or even how much you save. It's about understanding how money actually works. Most people treat money like it's some mysterious force that only economics professors can understand. They throw around terms like inflation and compound interest without really grasping what these concepts mean for their daily lives. Let me give you a reality check that might change everything. Inflation isn't just some abstract economic concept, it's literally stealing your purchasing power every single day. If you're keeping all your money in a savings account earning practically nothing, you're actually getting poorer year after year, even if your account balance stays the same. That $1,000 you saved last year can buy less stuff today than it could 12 months ago. Congratulations, you just lost money by trying to be financially responsible. The system is rigged and they didn't bother teaching you the rules. Meanwhile, people who understand how money works are using inflation to their advantage. They're borrowing money at low interest rates to buy assets that appreciate faster than inflation. They're essentially getting paid to take on debt while your savings account slowly bleeds value. This is why financial education should be mandatory in schools, but it's not. And I think that's intentional. A financially literate population would be much harder to exploit. Now, let's talk about something that'll probably make you uncomfortable. Your relationship with money was largely shaped by watching your parents, and chances are they had no idea what they were doing either. If your parents fought about money constantly, you probably developed the belief that money causes problems in relationships. If they lived paycheck to paycheck despite working hard, you might have internalized the idea that financial struggle is just part of life. But here's the thing nobody tells you. Those patterns aren't permanent. You can literally rewire your brain's relationship with money by understanding how wealth actually gets built. Most people think rich people got that way through luck, inheritance, or some special knowledge that normal people don't have access to. But the reality is much more boring and much more achievable than that. The average millionaire in America is a 57-year-old business owner who lives in a modest house, drives a used car, and has been consistently investing for decades. They didn't win the lottery or inherit a fortune. They just understood the power of compound interest and had the discipline to let it work. Here's the part that might sting a little. If you're spending money on things that make you look successful instead of things that actually build wealth, you're playing a game you can't win. Look, I'm not here to tell you to become obsessed with accumulating millions or to judge your worth by your bank balance. But pretending money doesn't matter while it controls every major decision in your life isn't enlightenment, it's self-deception. Money is a tool, and like any tool, it's better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. Stop letting people who benefit from your financial dependence convince you that wanting security makes you shallow. Your future self will thank you for caring about money today.